Here we go.
Perfect. You are sharing.
And I have to, I've got too many things here. Are you seeing that?
Seeing the Global Evaluation Week of 2021.
All right, that's not what I want to be showing.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in just a moment. Thank you all for showing up for the Regenerative Costa Rica discussion on Blue Marble Baseline.
Have you seen the blue marble?
Yes.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Michael Quinn Patton with the Blue Marble Evaluation Network, and we welcome you to this very important webinar today on the connection between local and global, and with Costa Rica as our focus. Blue Marble Evaluation is about thinking globally, acting locally and globally, evaluating the interactions. And this is Global Evaluation Week worldwide. This entire week, there are activities going on around the world and throughout the week featuring the connection between the local and the global, what we've come to call global. And the Costa Rica case will both offer us insights into these interactions between global knowledge and local and indigenous knowledge, the importance of place on our planet, and the connections we all share. As a part of that connection of place, we like to begin, being based here in Minnesota, where I'm coming to you from, with an acknowledgement of the indigenous land that we are coming from. And so to do that, I'm going to share with you a
Kolamausi ni Shinzi Wichiwa New Kanewak Ninon GIE Shana Wisconsin Ndalapanewe Kwe Mohikanawe Kwe Anishik Kishalamokwe Anishik. Greetings, my name is Nicole Bowman. That's my English name. My spirit name is Wichiwa New Kanewak, accompanied by the 4 eagles, Flying Eagle Woman. And I am from the Lenape and the Mohican Nation on Turtle Island. My residence is in Shawano, Wisconsin, and I am outside by my sacred fire. And today I will give a greeting and pray for our Mother Earth and to the directions and our medicines in the language. Anishik, Anishik, Anishik. Anishik ki shalamokwe, Alamiliang yon kwai kishkwik, walk, michwakin, walam lissa walkin, walk, ni alagomatit walk, ni wikian. Anishik ki shalamokwe, Alamiliang, kukana aki, our Mother Earth, walk, ki shoch, the sun, walk, ni pahum, the moon, walk, along waywalk, the stars, walk, papatakwik, the thunders. Anishik ki shalamokwe, thank you, Creator. Elamiliang, for giving us Tindao Wak Mbi, the fires and the water. Back there is our river. Asinal Wak Kash Hung, Meetwak Wak Papa Walashik, for the stones and the wind and the trees and the flowers. Anishik ki shalamokwe, mi Huskwil Wak Wicha Pikil, for the grasses and the medicines. Anishik ki shalamokwe, Elamiliang, thank you, Creator, for giving us Aweya Yasuk, walk Awala Shoshuk, for the animals and the birds, walk Namasak, walk Akochsak, for the fish and for the insects. Anishik Kishalamokwing, Elamiliang, Yon Kwai Kishquik, Kohamina Wak Kamahomsina, for the grandmothers and the grandfathers, our rocks. Kukana Wak Kokuna, for our mothers and our fathers. Anishik Kishalamokwing, Elamiliang, Yon Kwai Kishquik, Wak Nicha Nina, Wak Kachosimina, for our children and our friends, we thank you, Creator. Anishik Kishalamokwe, Elamiliang, Lapi Anishik Elamiliang. Thank you again, Creator, for giving me Yon Kwai Kishquik Wak Nimu Wakanam for my whole life and for this day. Into the 7 directions I say Anishik, 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 Anishik. Aho.
Thank you, Nikki, and Nishik, to all of you. Welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to my longtime colleague and fellow traveler, Glenn Page, who's organized the session today and is working as part of the Blue Marble Network, especially around place-based issues and baselines for tracking changes in ecosystems. Glenn, I'll pass it to you.
Well, I thank you, Michael, and greetings, everyone. And thank you so much for taking out some time of your day to join us on this really incredible journey of exploration into the process of regeneration. And the ambition is not just at a specific place, it's actually the ambition is at the nation of a whole for Costa Rica. And we're joined by 3 remarkable leaders in this process. And so you'll hear from 3 voices, and I'll come back at the end and share with you a bit of the process of how we're bringing Blue Marble evaluation together and this idea, this concept of regeneration and working to establish a baseline, a set of multidimensional reference points to measure the pathway towards regeneration, which is really all about adaptive learning by doing. So we're going to begin by hearing from Dr. Eduard Muller, a great friend and colleague. And Eduard's the founder and rector of the University of International Cooperation. He's been there since 1994, and he's a true innovator in education, leading the UCI to be a pioneer in online education in over 60 countries. And as an innovator, he's globally recognized for his work in regenerative development, having established more than 20 global partners, the Regenerative Costa Rica Hub in 2018, which has grown to a road mapping process for the regeneration of the country as a whole. And then we'll also hear from his colleague, Fernanda Pia, who's an absolute remarkable person. She's the technical coordinator of Regenerative Costa Rica. She's leading the Savory Hubs that she'll speak to in a moment, but also supports the building and capacity of communications and the master's program, which is a certificate in sustainability program. And she is fluent in 6 languages. And so we're delighted to be joined by Fernanda, and also we'll hear from Olivier Chassé. Dr. Chassé is the program director of Costa Rica Regenerative. He's the leader of the Biodiversity program. And for several years before this was the executive director at the Tropical Science Center and co-director of the Great Green Macaw Research and Conservation Project. So with that, let me turn it over to Eduard to lead us into the experience of Regenerative Costa Rica.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Michael, and all of our guests here. I love to see all these faces and names. This is going to be a great session. As you mentioned, 27 years ago when I founded UCI, the idea was to prepare professionals for sustainability, for implementation of sustainability. Several years had gone by already since the Brundtland report about leaving future generations the same conditions that we had, and that was not happening. In 1996, we decided to include, besides environment, society, and economy, culture, politics, and spirituality, and how to integrate those 6 dimensions for sustainability. And about 12 years ago, basically was very clear already And having transitioned through the UN system, UNESCO, the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, as a negotiator in Nicoya for the strategic plan and the Aichi targets, I was just convinced that sustainability was not possible anymore. We actually started becoming unsustainable in 1970 when our global footprint was bigger than our ecological capacity of the planet. Now, all these decades later, we're actually at 1.8 planets, a little bit over 1.8 planets of consumption, and there is no possibility. When we look at models for development, like Singapore, yeah, it's a beautiful city. Yeah, they have buildings with forests on them, but Singapore has an ecological footprint that is 10,000% higher than its biological capacity. So definitely that's not a model to follow. So thinking on the conceptual development, how to integrate those 6 dimensions, the only way I could actually figure out, or we as a team, was based on a territory. So we look at it as layers, where the basic layer is nature, functional landscapes, no matter if it's urban, rural, protected area, productive areas, marine, every landscape has to provide conditions for life, and not only human life, for all life. So if we don't have functional landscapes, we don't have a chance to do anything in the future. So we need to regenerate the capacity of these landscapes, and that's regenerating biodiversity, which automatically increases ecosystem services. So instead of looking at soil as an inert material where we add chemicals to produce, we bring life back to the soil, and nature will take care of producing food in abundance. Then we put on the other layers: society, empowerment of communities, self-determination, participation, true democracy. The regenerative economy, which is a local development. We need to get the traditional commercial, global commercial food exchange under control. We need to actually develop local consumption, local production, bring people from local communities into society and not exclude them. We have in Costa Rica a big gap in inequality. So inequality is growing more and more every year. To reverse that, the only way is to actually give people the opportunity to become part of society, active, and not only jobs, but actually work. So their own businesses. Culture is fundamental. It actually is the glue that brings the community together. It's what makes us in Costa Rica different than people in Japan or China. So it's not only postcards with typical dances, it's actually the living culture which gives people pride of belonging and belonging to a territory, and identifying then with that territory and wanting to be a true host and part of nature in that territory. Politics, we need to definitely change our political system. We need to bring the feminine principle back of caring. And we need to really empower and help educate young politicians. We need a lot of young women taking over local governance, ministries, central governments, and even the UN system. Because we need to move away from the ego economy, ego society, transition through an eco society, but go to seva, which is humanity in service of life. So this all sounds very good in books, in papers, but how do you do it? I think that is the biggest challenge we live with sustainability. Nobody knew how to implement it. Everybody talked about it, all these definitions. You go into Google and you find 500 million entries for sustainable development, but we never could apply it. So how do we do it? And this is where we started in 2018, bringing several very key actors in regeneration to Costa Rica and launching what we called initially a regenerative hub. And we've actually co-founded the Regenerative Communities Network with other bioregions that are doing regeneration, so we can actually co-create regeneration as we go along across the planet. So this is what actually triggered us to go expanding, and we saw the opportunity of actually increasing our outreach more than what we were actually thinking of pilot projects. We need to scale it up. We need to show that transitioning to a third horizon of prosperity, of abundance is possible, but we cannot talk about it. We need to actually demonstrate it. And this is where you come in. This is where Blue Marble comes in. We need to have the metrics in place and show the world that we can actually reverse climate change in less than 3 decades just by changing the way we produce food. We can bring biodiversity back, and we've been demonstrating that we can produce huge amounts of food. Local communities are producing 10 tons of food per month that feed 30 families. But we also bring biodiversity back. The first insect counts, 79 species of insects that appeared in a barren pasture land that didn't have anything more than ants 4 or 5 months ago. So by demonstrating this, then we can have people adopt these life patterns, and we start moving away from the old paradigm. So that is what Costa Rica is trying to do. It's trying to show the world with metrics, with science, and with action that we can actually co-create the better world together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eduard. The wisdom that you provide is just remarkable, in the leadership. And over to you, Fernanda.
Thank you, Eduard. Thank you, Glenn. I will share my screen. Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Costa Rica Regenerative, the initiative, and build upon what Eduard was mentioning and tell you a little bit more about the work we have been doing and the mission and vision and what we want to imagine. So this is Costa Rica. I just wanted to show you the map. We are a small country in Central America. I'm not sure how many people from other countries are seeing this webinar, so I wanted to give a little bit of background. So we are a small country in Central America. We have both the Caribbean and the Pacific oceans, and we are well known because we don't have an army since 1948, and that also helped us to strengthen our universal health system and our education, our public education. We are also known because we have a steady increment in our forest coverage since the 1980s, when the government introduced the payment for ecosystem services. And we are also well known because most of our energy comes from renewable sources. But also this might change a little bit, since now it's mostly centralized sourcing, and probably we need to work on towards decentralizing that, even if it's renewable energy. But Costa Rica is also one of the countries that utilizes more agrochemicals in agriculture. So that's one of our major goals, and that's why also we work so much in agriculture here. The inequity in Costa Rica has been growing very much in the last 20 years. We had a very equal society, and this has been getting worse. And we, of course, suffer from the global changes happening all around the planet. So this is a little bit of background of Costa Rica. And then I wanted to tell you a little bit about Costa Rica Regenerativa. Costa Rica Regenerativa, as Eduard mentioned, is an initiative of the University of International Cooperation, which Eduard founded in 1994. And Regenerate Costa Rica brings together a transdisciplinary community in order to reflect, plan, and activate projects that enable the transition towards regenerative paradigm. So we are networking, we are doing projects, implementing projects, and we are building a narrative that focuses on regenerative development and the possibilities that that gives us for the future that we want. And what moves us, what makes us work every day, our purpose, what we want to achieve, is a life that can evolve in free, healthy, and fair conditions. So this is what we stand for. And then talking a little bit about regeneration, as Eduard was saying, each place is different and we need to work on places. So regeneration strengthens the authenticity and the essence of the place. And what we are also hoping to do with the Blue Marble baseline is to really understand the potential of each place that we are working on. So each place is unique. Each place has their own history, the culture, the natural environment, traditions, and governance. So we work with the place, and understanding the unique conditions, we can bring forward the future that this place can build and wants to build. So we're looking at bringing together the people of a place and imagine together the future that we want for that place. And I just wanted to mention the importance of imagination and imagine at the moment, because we are in an imagination crisis. Some studies have said that people do not have the space, the time, trauma, insomnia, sleeping disorders, homogenization of things are not allowing people to imagine different things. So we really need to nourish and create the space, safety spaces for people to get together. And imagination can come from doing many different things, such as cooking and baking and gardening and just sitting down and talking to friends. So it's just creating those spaces and the time for imagination to come alive. And I read this, and I really think that it's also good to see that we need culture and natural history. So we really need to understand and know things to be able to have imagination and think of things in different ways and connect things differently. So that comes, innovation is not just starting from zero. So we also need diversity, and we need contact with the natural world. And I just want to read this sentence quickly. Our imagination itself takes roots in the natural world, and increasingly the natural world is being distanced from us, and that can only impoverish our imagination. So we really need to also get back into contact with nature. And finally, transformation cannot be scaled or manufactured, it can only be gardening. So we are really hoping to be the gardeners, and we are hoping to help the transformation happen. And it's, we need everybody, and we are inviting everybody to do it with us. And so thank you, Glenn. That was what I wanted to share with you all. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, Fernanda, that was beautiful. And it's really all about growing the gardens of hope. So thank you so much. That was really lovely. And just echoing what Eduard's saying, it's really about bringing the feminine back and reimagining place, as you've described so beautifully. And with that, let's hand it over to Dr. Chassot, to Olivier, and walk us through the process and some of this work that we've already begun regarding the mapping. So over to you, Olivier. You may be on mute.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I was on mute. That's a classic from those times. And thank you so much, Glenn and the team, for putting up this together. And on this occasion, I would like to give you some quick and brief context about the Guanacaste bioregions and the first mapping effort we're doing in collaboration with the Blue Marble Evaluation for a great work that we're just starting and hope to bring further. So some of the challenges that Guanacaste is currently facing is that it really had a very strong development in the last 40 years. Actually, I'm from Switzerland and I came to Costa Rica 28 years ago. And the first place I went was Guanacaste. I went working with marine turtle, and I fell in love with the country and its people and its biodiversity. But the challenges have been amazing, and they transform Guanacaste in some very positive ways and also in some negative. So we've been driving health, knowledge, and standard of living improvements. But with that also came to a heavy cost to nature and the stability of the Earth's operating systems that sustain life. Our mapping took place in 4 different areas of focus, and they're all somewhat arbitrary and based on our own limited perception of the territory. But Regenerative Costa Rica has a very strong focus on Guanacaste, and great part of our heart lies in this amazing place in the planet. So getting back to what Fernanda mentioned, and just giving out a little bit of geographical context for our friends assisting to the webinar and from different places in the world. We're a small country in Central America, blessed by an amazing biodiversity and culture. We're between Panama in the south, Nicaragua on the north. And Guanacaste is actually just one of 7 provinces. And our region of focus also includes parts of the Punta Arenas province. I will show you a bit more on the next slides. The extension of the Guanacaste bioregion is 11,000 square kilometers, which is about 1/5 of the country. So Guanacaste is one of the largest provinces, but it's also one of the lowest demographics density in the country. And as I said, Guanacaste has an amazing and very strong indigenous and modern cultural heritage. And it's become, over the years, the main tourism destination, as much for foreigners as for local Costa Rican people going on vacations to Guanacaste. If we have a look at the biodiversity general proxy for year 1997, this is an analysis of satellite images from 1998. And we can observe that basically 36% of the territory of our bioregion was made up of natural ecosystem. And before that, there's been a strong dynamics, including an extensive cattle ranching during the 1980s, which was known as the hamburger connection, feeding fast food chains in North America, and heavy timber extraction as well. And this has basically changed in the 90s, as Fernanda said, with the application of payment for ecosystem services, changes in the social demographic dynamics of the country in general, and Costa Rica's efforts to reverse damage to natural ecosystem. If I look, we have a look at 2012, which is the most recent satellite image available on a free basis, and we will need to make a much deeper effort in mapping these current forest covers. But this is the information we have, and we cannot really contrast those 2 sets of information from 1997 and 2012 because of differences in resolution or the methodology used for classification of images. But basically we can see that the trend of forest cover has remained the same, 36.72%. But I would say from my experience, and maybe my colleagues can are witness to this, that we've been actually losing a lot and recovering some, and some of the quality of the ecosystem is getting much better. This is the case, for example, in the northern area of Guanacaste, where the Guanacaste Conservation Area has been conducting experiments in restoration for the last 30 years with amazing successes. And the dynamic is quite different in different parts of the region. And this is why we have decided to focus on 4 different areas of focus. And currently, the coastal development is doing a lot of damages in many parts of Guanacaste, and it's been very symptomatic over the last decade, maybe. And we've seen a lot more going on since the beginning of the pandemics. In terms of protected areas, the Guanacaste bioregion has 48 protected areas, of which 10 are national parks. The one highlighted in green, you can see some very large complexes in northern Guanacaste, the volcanoes, and some other areas within the Nicoya province. They make up for almost 36% of the region taken at large. And maybe the last trend is an increase in marine management protected areas, both for fishing and for conservation. In terms of conserved areas, which are different than protected areas, and we're looking here at the 16 biological corridors initiative that have been ongoing in Guanacaste and Nicoya for a bit more than 20 years. They total 600,000 hectares, which is about 53% of the territory of Guanacaste. So quite a lot. And if we add all the protected areas to those biological corridors, we're almost covering the greatest part of Guanacaste. So basically, most of those local biological corridors initiatives are led by specific local councils, which is made up of civil society and government agencies. In terms of administrative, this bioregion has 11 different counties, or cantones, as we call them in Costa Rica, made up from 47 districts. So it's quite complex in its delineation. And there are also 4 districts in coffee color on the southernmost tip of Nicoya, including Lepanto, Cobano, Paquera, and Chira, that belong to the province of Punta Arenas. But they're part of our view to the ecosystem. And as I said, demographics are quite low, only 400,000 habitants, which is about 8% of Costa Rica's total. So our 4 beautiful areas of focus are the Gulf of Nicoya and Isla Chira. The second one is Santa Teresa and Malpais in the south. The third one is the Blue Zone. And the fourth one is what we call the Golden Coast. So basically, those 4 areas of focus together sum up about 30% of the regions in its terrestrial realm, not taking into account the marine. We'll see a bit more of that on the next slides. And all of those areas of focus have very distinctive characteristics, and we will not have the time to go through all of those characteristics. And this is something we hope to develop through a collaborative process during the Blue Marble evaluation, of course. So this is just the first very basic and overview of those regions. So if we take the first one, the Gulf of Nicoya and Isla Chira is the smallest of those 4 study areas with about 83,000 hectares. A smallest marine part that includes the Isla Chira and the mouth of the Tempisque River. Some of its characteristics is a very low elevation compared to the other ones, and a very low human density. Some of Costa Rica's more important wetlands, such as Palo Verde National Park, which is a Ramsar site and has been for a very long time. Very distinctive karst ecosystems, such as the Barahonda National Park. And the backbone of this region is the Tempisque River that flows from northern Guanacaste into the Gulf of Nicoya. And because this area is pretty much prone to extensive agriculture practices, such as sugarcane and rice, lots of runoff are carried by the Tempisque River into the Gulf of Nicoya. And because the Gulf of Nicoya is quite close to the open sea, and with very distinctive bathymetry, it makes a perfect sink for all those bad agrochemicals running from the Tempisque basin. So lots of concerns with contamination, pollution affecting fishing communities in the Chira Island, for example. The second one, Santa Teresa in Malpais, is another beautiful and amazing place that people from everywhere seek to get to know. It's very quiet and nice, but lately the tourism development has been strong and stronger, especially after 2000. There are many surfing communities such as Santa Teresa, Malpais, but actually the whole coast and the whole Guanacaste coast is a prime surfing destination for many visiting from everywhere in the world. There are 3 very large marine protected areas, at least in Costa Rican standards. And incidentally, Cabo Blanco is the country's very first protected area established in 1963 to protect some unique ecosystems. The Blue Zone is another extraordinary area, not very well studied in terms of its label, the Blue Zone. It boasts extraordinary longevity with people reaching maybe 121 years, but no official records because of paperwork. And I don't know how to say that in English, but this is one of the world's prime longevity areas, such as Sardinia and many other places in Japan. And we've not unraveled the secrets and the mysteries of this amazing longevity. The area has some large cities, at least in Guanacaste standards, such as Nicoya and Ojancha. They're very different because of their elevation, and they're also very different in terms of the culture. Ojancha has a long time agriculture background with people coming from the San Ramon Central Valley area, while the agriculture in the rest of Guanacaste has a complete different background, reasons, and flavor. And on the coastal area, of course, Samara and Nosara, beautiful places that attract lots of visitors from Costa Rica and abroad. And the Golden Coast, where we have our field house in Playa Potrero, is another very specific and very interesting area. It has, it's been a lot of aggressive tourism development over the last 2 decades, especially in the Tamarindo, Flamingo, Coco area, which is the northern part, central and northern part of that small area of focus. There's a big marina coming in Flamingo that will change the shape and the dynamics of the entire area. And also from a cultural standpoint of view, the Sabanero culture is very important to people living in Guanacaste, with a more vaquero cowboy culture than in any parts of the country. So closing remarks regarding this first intent of mapping. This is just a general framework that will be further refined through many workshops. So this is just a basic proposal. All those areas of focus are very diverse, even within themselves. And we find so many differences between Ojancha and Nosara, for example, or between Isla of Chira and communities around the Palo Verde National Parks. They all face different challenges that basically come from very different situations and different historical and cultural backgrounds, which make them so much interesting. And maybe there's a two-pace economy with a very strong clash between the wealthiest of the country and elsewhere, and the poorest also. So many concerns about social and economics. And once again, a very strong cultural heritage, which makes Guanacaste such a unique and different place on Earth. Thank you, and back to you, Glenn.
Olivier, wonderful. Thank you so much. And just so people know, which is rather extraordinary, we've just begun this collaboration in the last month. So everything that you've just heard is the beginning, is the start conditions. It's just the early days of us collaborating together. So I'm going to give a little bit more detail around the evaluation framing and why Blue Marble might actually be an appropriate frame for this. So I'm going to do a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation. So as was mentioned, Eduard mentioned it, Fernanda mentioned it, and also Olivier mentioned it, that Costa Rica has been indeed a national model. And if we think about just in the past 30 to 40 years ago, there was records set for the rates of deforestation. Now it's a complete paradigmatic shift. So when you're asking the question, where are there examples of transformation and what have been the systems to enable those transformations, one place to look is the nation of Costa Rica, because what they have done to shift that rate of deforestation towards regeneration. So as Fernanda mentioned, things like national parks and the social safety net, as opposed to investing in a national army. But there's also been great innovations in the financial structures, things like debt for nature swaps, that have been both around commercial debt, but also bilateral debt, real innovation that other countries are actually modeling today. Also tax deductions at the scale of individuals and at the scale of taxpayers to incentivize reforestation and to actually also in parallel with bans on deforestation. And as Fernanda mentioned, the rather amazing payment for ecosystem service model that's happened at the country level. So as Michael often says, as Michael Quinn Patton often says, is sometimes transformation is actually easy to evaluate. When you see it, you can understand it. So what was once a trend of massive deforestation is now a remarkable trend towards net reforestation, an improvement in an associated improvement in economics, health, education, and other dimensions of well-being. But as Eduard mentioned, that's not the complete story. The complete story is that in this area, and as Olivier just showed, there's huge pressures that are similar in other parts around the world. So as we consider the realities of coastal systems, there's enormous coastal ecosystem change that is moving in certain directions. In some areas, it's increasing, other areas decreasing. So the contextual understanding of both the sociological, the human dimensions, as well as the biophysical dimensions are critically important. And that's why, as Olivier was mentioned, we selected those 4 areas of focus, because each one of those, even though they're virtually adjacent to one another, they're very different and distinct. And this whole area illustrates the global socioeconomic trends and Earth systems trends. So even though as a country as a whole, you could actually say it's created some transformation systems, there's still an enormous path ahead towards a regenerative model, particularly a regenerative economic model, as well as a societal model, and one that also looks at the stewardship, long-term stewardship of the biophysical systems. So as we think about this, the issues that are happening around the world are indeed happening in a significant way in Costa Rica. Virtually all these elements that are seen around the world are happening in one way or another in Costa Rica. So this is not dissimilar to everywhere else, yet in the countries, we'll call it the DNA of response to ecosystem change, there has been a reaction, there has been a response. So as the country as a whole is considering what has to happen to change the system, and they made their pathways towards reforestation, now it's this challenge to understand what is the pathway to regeneration. And that's where the brilliant leadership of Eduard, Fernando, and Olivier is so critically important, and how we think this could be a good opportunity for applying blue marble thinking. So the reason why traditional evaluation doesn't really work in this context, that there's high degrees of innovation. There's ongoing constant development, addressing and adapting to the kind of change that's happening. Things like the COVID-19 response and how that's happening. High degrees of uncertainty across virtually every paradigm you can imagine. Very, very dynamic environments, social, ecological, governance dynamics are constantly changing. A lot of emergent phenomena, this issue of both top-down and bottom-up forces of change. And we'll talk about that because that is so critically important to understanding as we describe navigating the muddied middle of top-down and bottom-up forces of change. So adaptations are critical and necessary, and traditional evaluation doesn't necessarily support this sort of ongoing reality. So there are three ways of conceptualizing theories of change, one of which is the old game of linear causality, logic models, logical frameworks. So there'll be some of that where there are areas that we consider to be relatively simple that will work quite well. But there's also a lot of interdependent systems relationships that are happening. And so we'll be applying systems thinking and systems theory, but also complex non-linear dynamics, these emergent phenomena. And this, again, is where things like developmental evaluation comes through. So the principles of developmental evaluation are so critically important that it emphasizes ongoing adaptation and learning. Is this ability to adapt to emerging issues and having a process of gaining feedback in somewhat real time to inform decision-making, providing that timely and continuous long-term feedback process, that mechanism. There are summative moments, there are decisions that need to be made, and so aggregating and harvesting the information and making decisions. But this issue of complex systems is so real in this context. But it also, the power of developmental evaluation is it aligns with other frameworks, things like network theory, innovation theory, complexity theory, social science, learning, the iceberg, and integral theory. But critically, this idea of blue marble evaluation theory that's recently been introduced, it marks, I believe, the critical evolution of the field of evaluation, moving from a bit of a linear cause-effect thinking towards a much more dynamic systems-informed approach with a series of principles that's focused critically on the practice. And that's what we're talking about. How do we actually operationalize these ideas, these theories? So some of the elements that really help guide us are the core principles. There are 4 overarching principles and 10 operating principles, but I'll just give a quick insight into the 4 overarching. But the reality is we're applying those 10 operating principles critically in this area. But it's really important to think, yes, we're working at the local scale, but to have this whole Earth big picture thinking around Earth systems change. This understanding of the anthropocene as critical context, knowing and facing the realities of the anthropocene, which is fully alive and well in the context of Costa Rica, as Olivier was mentioned, things like income disparities, huge areas, particularly in some of those areas of focus. There's an enormous incoming buying up of land and creating large mansions and large development areas with a very poor community and issues of poverty surrounding it. So issues of Anthropocene as context, critically important. And how do we actually break out of the bonds of the traditional forms of engagement and create transformative engagement and exist that is engagement that is consistent with the kind of scope and scale, the direction and speed of the kind of change that's needed. So sometimes we use the language moving at the speed of trust. And part of what's critical is how much UCI and the Regenerative Costa Rica project has built trust in the community, which is so critically important. And finally, the overarching integration principle, integrating with the blue marble principles in the design of this work, which we'll be introducing. Again, we're in the very, very early days, so we're very much in the design thinking? And then how do we best engage, and how do we track and measure the change towards transformation and regeneration? So one of the tools that we're using is a methodology that we created about 10 years ago, actually about 12 years ago, and it's looking at understanding and analyzing the governance, the power, the response to ecosystem change, and co-creating a blue marble baseline with this process. So here's the theory. It begins with understanding the changes in the system, not just the natural system, but the human system as well. So looking at things like goods and services, resilience of the ecosystem itself, but also with attention to human activities and human well-being. And so much of this is understanding, well, how has the response to that kind of change that's happened over time? And instead of looking ahead and asking the question, where are we going? We actually begin intentionally by looking back and asking a very different question, asking a question, how did we get to where we are today? And so in each of those 4 areas that Olivier illustrated, we'll be actually doing this process in order to then look forward, to then imagine what is likely to happen in each of those 4 areas in the next 10, 30, 50, 100 years. But as I say, it begins with looking back, and we'll be developing things like a timeline of key issues, a trends in key variables, developing different forms of systems mapping, social systems mapping, as well as the biophysical systems mapping, looking in terms of power and response to change over different eras of governance. So for example, in the 1970s, things like the cattle production hugely expanded, and there were things like World Bank credits given to Costa Rica to greatly expand the cattle production. And then of course, with the collapse of global meat, sugar, coffee prices in the late 70s and early 80s, there was all this abandonment of these agricultural areas. And so out of that came this remarkable response. And Olivier referred to the Guanacaste conservation area as a great example of a case study of response to ecosystem change, one of the most prolific restoration projects on the planet. And so those are things like case studies we'll be digging into, and I'll illustrate another one in just a moment. But then we'll be doing a looking forward with people from the communities in each of those 4 areas. Things like the projection of trends in climate change, the selection of the issues that are currently that matter most, issues that we often say stirs the blood of the people of the place. We look at things like transformation systems mapping, understanding issues of risk, purpose, and process. Who are the partners? What are the variables to pay attention to over time? And it really is rooted into an understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of the existing governance system in response to change. And then understanding, okay, in the next 10, 30, 50 years, what's the kind of challenges that are likely to occur, and is the governance system fit for purpose? The reality is virtually anywhere in the world, the answer to that question is no. So the opportunity is, okay, what needs to change? What are the transformation systems that need to be brought into play? So things like just simply the act of doing a timeline is incredibly powerful. This idea of zooming in, so scaling in using our relative microscopes to scale in, but also using our telescopes to imagine out at a global scale. But a key aspect is what goes on in the middle is what we're calling a BioRegional Macroscope, the ability to see together that integrates issues of local and global to see the interrelationships at a bioregional scale. So this idea of co-creating, coming together, working together to imagine what is a way of seeing this bioregion together. So it's also connecting with others around the world who are working on a similar pathway, other networks that are interested in having both local impact and global impact and connecting them together. So it's Costa Rica is now going to be connected to other areas as well and furthering the current connections that they already have. So some of the actions that we'll be doing, seeing systems, leadership and education. So much of this, Fernanda is leading in the UCI team. There's a great certificate in regeneration, but things like learning journeys, trainings, as I mentioned, the certificate programs, stories of place, elements around transformation systems, the seeing, things like social systems mapping, these governance baselines, timelines, use of GIS, and some of that material that Olivier was showing. This directed inquiry, understanding the metrics and indicators that matter most, the sense making to this process. And in complex contexts, it's about engaging in the system, engaging and learning from the doing. So learning by doing, engaging, sensing, and responding. And finally, accelerating regenerative systems, things like regenerative capital, cooperatives, scaling deep, wide, and out, really looking at those financial models, see what makes so much sense regarding things like debt for nature swap and other payment for ecosystem service models. So one of the things we're going to do in the next 6 months is we're going to actually work together with people from those 4 areas. And we're going to create a training course around what does it mean to better see that system. So we're a minimum of 3 to 4 people from each of those places working together, a bit of a train the trainer model. And each module is roughly 3 hours long. We'll follow that same framework I just illustrated. And there'll be some assembling of information, and they'll be working also with folks from other regions, such as the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative that's going on in Peru and Ecuador. So cross-system learning. Also connecting to other folks who are doing the exact same work in the Gulf of Maine, in Iceland, in the West Fjords and Husavik, in County Mayo, Ireland, and also folks who have gone through this process in the Tayside and Clyde bioregions. The reason why these 2 are so important is they are both adjacent to the area where COP26 is being held in Glasgow in November of this year. And so we hope to actually bring this concept of bioregional seeing at both the Arctic Circle Assembly, but also at COP26, and bringing the story of regenerative Costa Rica front and center. We will likely not be on the main stage. That is an entirely political process. However, what we do want to do, and we will be doing, is participating in the fringe events at COP26, and eventually developing learning journeys. So people of the place will be able to see the systems themselves, but also sharing across these different bioregions working together. So I'm just going to quickly run through one type of an example, just so you have an illustration of when we say ecosystem governance, what do we mean? Around the world, freshwater access is a huge issue. And so one of the things that we can actually apply is some of this blue marble thinking. So as we apply this blue marble thinking to the case studies of water access in this area, one of those areas that Olivier mentioned was the blue zone. And this is basically that blue zone that Olivier was talking about. And there's 3 watersheds that have had some really interesting analysis of the water governance challenges. And so these are 3 subbasins located in the Nicoya, Hohancha counties of Guanacaste. So this is one of the areas of focus. So the Rio Potrero, the Cañetal, and the upper Rio Nasara. And so the issues around is the development patterns, increased population, and the withdrawal of water. This is a dry forest area. This is not like other parts of Costa Rica that has enormous rainfall. There's been research around this topic around the world, but there's not been a lot of research until several folks from Arizona State University did some pretty intensive work in 2014, but it hasn't necessarily been shared deeply within the system. So part of what our work is to uncover and engage with this and see what's happened since then. So looking at this issue of the complex water problem and the complex water challenge that's happening in this particular area. So it's focusing on action research efforts towards solution-oriented strategies in what could be actionable knowledge. So just giving just a quick overview is the Central American dry tropics, featuring water scarcity, issues of social tension, climate impacts and threats, offers a unique and useful setting for this understanding of action research to how can water be governed more sustainably in this issue of water contested and climate threatened regions. So it's digging deep and understanding both the work that has been done and what's happened since then, since this intervention that has occurred in these areas. So for example, the upper Nasara typically doesn't flow in the dry season. So groundwater is transported by truck to the town of Hojancha. And the city of Nicoya receives its entire water supply that's transported through surface flows. So there's some key issues to understand. So the existing knowledge base is part of what this blue marble baseline does, digs in and understands what has been collected. So understanding the models that have been developed that has mimicked the current system, that models the current system, looking at the climate impacts, looking at the sustainability effects of the option, and what has been the development of the transition strategies, the actionable knowledge. And so there was some good work that has been done, harvesting that, again, seeing what's happened since then, social network analysis, stakeholder mapping, etc. This is an example of a process that was done in 2014. So part of our work will be to see to what degree is this able to be updated and where have things changed. The participatory process actually that was focused on this looked at the real-time governing system to help fortify the ability and will of those involved in the complex water challenges. So it's not as if we're starting from scratch, but it is important for us to understand what has happened in the region. And when I say us, really what I mean is the people of the place. We're helping to facilitate a process that will be documented. And so there were some key participatory aspects that happened as part of this process. Again, a key question is what has happened since then around these critical issues of water governance. There was quite a bit of local engagement and involvement in the process by some of the local authorities as well. So a key aspect is to understand the degree to which these local authorities are involved. And so some of the findings, this top-down institutional hierarchy has a fragmented administrative scheme. So that was identified. And so part of the work that we'll be understanding and documenting through the baseline process is, has anything changed? Is this still the case? And if so, to what degree? There was suggestions for vertically responsive yet horizontally disparate agendas, with working with different national agencies at higher levels. How do the ministries actually work together? What are the regional scale actors and how are they now currently acting after this work that has been done several years ago? And the sub-regional actors arranged around agency offices, to what degree is there integration and coordination? And the areas that are disconnected from the process that was identified in the past research. So some of these challenges that were identified that, again, serve as an example of the kind of work that we're focusing on. And again, in this case, around one issue, around water governance, is this idea, the challenges of the failing of the coordination related to the use, management, and protection of groundwater. How has that changed? Has it changed? The inadequate leadership to identify collective goals, constructively open new ways of governing. So some of the elements of this particular case study, as just an example, is how do we further see, connect, and accelerate the way of seeing of these collective organizations that are already active in water governance. So it's not as if our work is coming in to inspire this necessarily. It's to understand what has occurred and to what degree is there still action involved in this process and what's the progress, and then what's the likelihood of the kind of challenges facing ahead. Looking at policy windows and the opportunities that can potentially be opened as windows of opportunities to build confidence and look at governance authority in new and in new and effective ways. So governance, it's really important that it's, as we think about governance towards regeneration, the pathway towards regeneration, how resources or an environment are utilized, how issues, problems, and opportunities, this whole idea of how do we see windows of opportunities. So often we see them in hindsight. How do we actually, as working with communities, see windows of opportunities that are opening into the future? The issues of behavior and behavior change. What is considered acceptable? What is considered forbidden? How is that changing over time? What are the issues regarding rules and sanctions? This is very true in things like marine protected areas, and the level of enforcement and compliance being so critically important with marine protected areas, and this issue of pathways. And so the summing up of this work is to identify pathways to regeneration to see if it's even possible. And so there's a lot of remarkable work that's happening around regeneration, things like designing regenerative cultures by Daniel Christian Wall, that really is inspired a lot of biomimicry, a lot of living systems thinking, health and resilience, but also things like that have been developed from the Capital Institute, principles of regenerative economy, and as Eduard mentioned, the work that UCI has done to help give birth to the Regenerative Communities Network, which is such a critically important group that's carrying this and bringing this further forward. So it's the blending of both the current realities of the kind of world that we're facing, identifying where there's opportunities for deep collaboration, and bringing an evaluative rigor with developmental evaluation, with principles-focused evaluation, and blue marble evaluation. So with that, before we open up to questions and discussions, I'll hand it over quickly to Michael, and then we'll open the floor to any sort of questions and discussions. So Michael, any thoughts, reflections?
Well, this is an amazing and important presentation, with especially this week, with the emphasis on the connection between global and local. There's been a lot of important interactions in the chat. I appreciate your staying on top of those, Eduard. And you can elaborate some of them as we move forward with the Q&A. But this illustrates, as Glenn said, one of the most fundamental blue marble evaluation principles, the connection between local and global. And the question that actually comes up most often in the training presentations I make and webinars is people are struggling to make the local global connection. It seems kind of abstract to them. And the beauty of a process like this is that it makes it quite concrete. It's not abstract at all. It's very real. The changes are very real. The challenges are very real. And the opportunities are very real. And so let me turn it back to you, Glenn, and see what folks have to add and their questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Michael. And I just want to recognize you and your thought leadership work. None of this from a blue marble perspective is really could be imagined without your leadership over the years. So it is really important to recognize your leadership. You have been a one-man transformation system on helping the field of evaluation to move in this direction. So thank you. So let's see if there's some opportunities for questions. I think Eduard's been tracking and providing feedback as we go. So if there are interested people, maybe you could use the hand raise if you'd like to ask a specific question at this point, or put something in the chat at the moment. So to see if there's any questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas you'd like to add to this.
And you know, I think it might be useful to let Eduard comment on some of what was in the chat, so that not everybody tracks the chat. And you've been making some important additions from your opening comments. So go ahead, Eduard, and add, expand on some of your original comments based on what people are asking in the chat. Not everybody tracks chat.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Actually, there's a lot of questioning in how we're going to measure this and how we're going to measure that, and if we're going to include the SDGs. And And I think Glenn answered a lot of that by saying this is just starting. And it's an evolving process, and it's a co-creational process. So yes, we'll involve anybody who wants to be involved in this initiative. Welcome, the doors are open. This is something that we have to build together. It's not a recipe, cooking recipe with the grams and the tablespoons defined. So I think it's a very exciting opportunity to actually use this framework and the big cooperation we have with many global initiatives and putting them on a bioregion where we all can learn. So we're working with the donut economics. We're working with Capital Institute and John Fullerton's regenerative economy. We're working with many of these different models, tools, methodologies, whatever you want to call them, to implement the Bounce Beyond initiative on strengthening new economies at the local level and using Costa Rica as an exemplar to show that the transition can happen. So I think it's a unique opportunity we have because we're bringing all of these global concepts into action at a bioregion, trying to integrate everything. If we can reverse the current donut of Costa Rica and make it a perfect donut and measure that with what we're doing through Blue Marble and Ugo with Seven Vortex, all these initiatives coming together, that's where we'll be able to answer a lot of the questions that came up on the chat. I think people are worried about how to measure things. So when Olivier said that some areas are better, there were questions around who defines better? What is better? So yes, I mean, going from 21% forest cover at a national level to 52 to 54% forest cover currently in 20 years. Is that good? Yeah, that's good. But how good is it? This is not primary forest in many cases. It's a secondary forest. Some of the forests are not as biodiverse and rich as they used to be. So yes, biologically speaking, they might not be the best solutions or metrics, but I think we have to look at the path and that we're on the right path. And there will be many deviations that we come to, many crossroads where we have to make decisions. But the thing is, we need to make those decisions with information, based on knowledge, and not only science and scientific knowledge, we also need to use the local knowledge, which is really important. I mean, people have been living in these ecosystems and have been seeing the changes. That information is, I would say, just as important as a scientific paper done by PhD students. We need all sources of information to make decisions. The thing is, most of the decisions currently at the global and at the national level, governments and so on, are not being made based on information and knowledge. And most importantly, not based on wisdom. So we have lost the ability, we produce data, information, knowledge, but we have lost the ability to take the time to actually digest all of this, discuss it, and transform all of that into wisdom. That has been like kind of, oh, that's for the old generations. Now we have to it's just too quick, moving everything quickly, and we don't have time to digest. So this is a tremendous opportunity, and I'm sure we'll answer a lot of questions that came up in the chat asking, are we going to include the SDGs? Well, you cannot not include the SDGs today. I personally don't really value them too much. I was involved in SDG 17. I went several times to the meetings in New York. Every single time, every single session was opened up thanking Monsanto, Coca-Cola, Syngenta, and Nestle for the economic support. And you look at SDG 17, and basically the corporate sector is going to be the one solving sustainability problems at the global level. And I don't think that is correct. I think local development is the focus. But they paid the bill. They paid the party. So they put the music. So I think they're good, but we have to be careful and we have to go beyond SDGs. So the SDGs for me are still in Horizon 1. They're still in the old paradigm. And we have to see what can be saved from that paradigm, as Buckfuller said, what we need to keep. And the Three Horizons methodology helps us decide on these things. We can't throw everything away. And definitely there are a lot of things we need to keep. But we really have to start creating that new model and creating the vision of a better horizon that gives hope to young people. Young people don't have hope now. So we need to say, yes, nature's giving us a chance. Actually, it gave us a lot of warnings with sea level rise, with extreme weather events, but most of those warnings affected the vulnerable people in the planet. The rich people weren't affected. So now it's sending us a beautiful present in the shape of something that we can't even see, that puts rich and poor, black, yellow, and white, all of us together on our knees to think about what we're doing. So I think this is a fire drill that nature is giving us. And at the same time, it showed us how resilient it is, how willing nature is to give back and replenish itself. The air got clean, the oceans got clean, fish came back, dolphins started coming into the Mediterranean again. So it's giving us a warning, but at the same time saying, look, if you're willing to work with me, I'm willing to be resilient and really provide abundance. So we need to shift away from learning how to adapt to a changing planet to learning how to co-create a better planet with nature. And we can reverse climate change in less than 30 years. And it's not going to be through electric cars. So soil health is now starting finally to get onto the stage of global discussions. And I still have scientists, friends that doubt that the soil will play an important role in climate mitigation. So we need to really prove to the world with metrics that we are moving in the right direction. I'm not saying we're going to get there in a year or in 5 years, in 10 years, or in 50 years, but show that we're moving in the right direction. So a lot of the reductionist science that does not see these processes can actually start opening their brains up to holistic approaches where 1 + 1 is not necessarily 2. It can be 3, it can be 4. But that doesn't fit in the hypothesis methods of science where you have to have one question and answer that one question. We have complexity and it's interactions that are important here. So maybe I covered most of the comments in the chat.
Thanks, Eduardo. And one of the things that impresses me about what you're doing, the last part of the Blue Marble Value Evaluation book, as Glenn mentioned, is about transformation and the transformation occurring through the integration of multiple players, each operating in their own arena, and each doing what they can do. And then you're going through just a few of the different models and approaches that you're working with, rather than choosing one, planetary boundaries, regenerative efforts. You went through a number of these, and it sounds like what you're doing is working with what you can from what each one of them offers, rather than choosing one, and looking for ways to synergize these various networks, each of which is a global network, so that connecting global networks, not being forced to say which one are you aligned with, but in fact integrating them, is a big part of what the Blue Marble perspective is seeing value, because each one brings something, including, as you emphasize, the indigenous networks, which are now global as well as local. That's been one of the major developments of the global local connection, is indigenous communities connecting globally to reinforce that indigenous knowledge that you talked about. And that's where we're just delighted to have you join and include Blue Marble as one of the perspectives that you're integrating.
Yeah, we need action. We need transformative action now. We cannot stay too long on academic discussions and publishing books. We need to show that it can be done. Actually, we're launching on June 9th, just in a few days, the first Masters in Regenerative Action. It's a joint program with Ubiquity University, with Green Project Management, with Donut Economics Action Lab, with Capital Institute, a lot of global partners. This is the first global master's program on regenerative action. And the first course will be a 1-month course given by Kate herself on the donut economics. So anybody who's interested in learning how to put regeneration into action, these global initiatives, I think, are allowing us to have more and more people already trained in regeneration, because it's a gap. Universities are still not there. So we need people who understand complexity, holistic processes, system thinking, and we don't have enough of them yet to actually make this at the scale that we need to reverse the planetary degradation.
Glenn?
Yeah, so there's one question in the chat, Eduard, which is probably an important one to address, and that's this issue of funding. And clearly, much like Michael said, with looking at the many different frameworks, this is also, which we like to use the term bricolage. It feels very much like the funding challenge is also assembling different aspects of funding in many different sources. But over to you, Eduard, regarding the funding challenge.
Yeah, we would probably be way far down on regeneration of the country if we had been able to get funding earlier. And we couldn't because there were no boxes to tick for this type of effort. The feedback we got back from organizations like MacArthur, we put a grant proposal in for the $100 million that they offered. They just cannot understand complexity, and they think this is actually unachievable or too complex. And that is the problem with funders. They want specific results. And we're looking for a broad band of integration of environment, society, culture, politics, spirituality. Many of them don't even know what spirituality means. They confuse it with religion. And many get scared off because we're working with spirituality. We're working with individuals. So, oh yeah, yoga. That's not that. So we were lucky, actually, because of COVID, a philanthropist was subsidizing food packages for 6,000 families. And being a businessman, he said, this is not sustainable. COVID is not going to be a month or 2 months where we can provide food. So that's how we got in to helping establish community farms and family farms. And we have today, I'm not sure, maybe Olivier has the exact information, but 400 or 500 families producing their own food in abundance. So that immediately triggered a good relationship with this donor who has really committed to supporting us. And we still need probably 3 or 4 times the budget we have, but it's allowing us to demonstrate that things can be done. And through there, we expect to be able to increase, and we're actually establishing impact investment fund for Regenerate Costa Rica. So we hope to be getting more fund. But what we've done until now hasn't been, I don't think we've gotten to $500,000 yet in spending over the last almost a year. And we have such powerful results that is exactly what we needed to show the world that if you put more money in, it's just the thing of scaling it up. We don't have to invent the wheel. We know how to do things. We know how to solve these challenges. So we do hope to be able to bring in more and more funders and collaborators. Not only money, we need expertise. So we need people like Glenn and Michael helping us with all their expertise, so we don't have to, reinvent the wheel on how to evaluate. So I think we need to start really working together, collaborating at a planetary level, and co-creating solutions for the challenges that we're already facing. If we do it together, that's what will really set us off.
That was beautifully said. And one of the important opportunities is to do this bilingually. And this is really important to engage because there's many people on this particular webinar who English is not their first language. And for that, I apologize if I went fast or sort of said a whole bunch of, just did the old game of just saying so much in one language. We're going to learn to make sure this is truly bilingual and engages people where they are. And Fernanda, I'd like to actually go back to you. You made a really important point of this idea of an imagination crisis. So after hearing all of this and being part of this process and now launching the new program, what are some of your thoughts regarding how this effort in Costa Rica can not just help address the imagination crisis there, but also be shared with other parts around the world to help inspire the reimagining towards a more just, equitable, regenerative world?
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, I think what this really, it really works in two ways. One is like doing it, making the examples, and the other is communicating. So in Costa Rica Regenerative, I think we really want to work in both senses. And the work we are doing and we are gonna develop with you, it's really implementing and giving the examples. And then we really also need to work on sharing the experiences we have and the success and these new ways with Costa Rica, because we need all of Costa Rica to get involved, but also the rest of the world. So definitely this is, I think, very, very important work to be done, and allowing people to see that things can be different, right? Because even the movies that we see is like apocalypse, collapse, and nothing to be done. So we really need to change that mindset and think that, and give hope, right? Like we need hope to move. Like despair can make us freeze and make us like not want to do anything. So we need to give hope to the young, but also to the old. and to the old also to show them that things can be done differently, because maybe it's more difficult to see things in a different way when you have been doing things like in one way for the last 30 years. So.
Beautiful. Well, I just want to, as we close and wrap up this remarkable opportunity to share this story, I want to recognize your work, Fernanda, on what you've done to create that certificate program in regeneration, which is truly novel, really forward thinking, and talk about inspiring. So it's really impressive, and the world, if it could, is thanking you, and certainly we on this call are recognizing your incredible contribution to that. So thank you, and thank you all, Olivier and Eduard, for incredible leadership. And let's turn it over to you, Michael, to bring us home.
Well, thank you all. A tremendous session. The recording will be available. And in the chat, you'll see a link to join the Blue Marble Evaluation Network so that you get notices of webinars and blogs and other materials that are emerging. We look forward to having connections, sharing information across the globe with people from different perspectives and in multiple languages and multiple ways of thinking about things. We have a webinar coming up at the end of June. They're also listed in the chat, and we'll look forward to having a number of you back here for that. So continue to celebrate Global Week. If you do a search for Global Week evaluation, it will point you to several additional sessions. There's one this afternoon in Brazil, and they're going on all week. So there's a lot of activity around the fundamental Blue Marble principle of connecting the local and the global perspective, part of the Blue Marble perspective. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you to the presenters, and thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you are. Goodbye.
Awesome.